Hey friends, it's time to talk about a favorite yet challenging garden vegetable, cucumbers. They're crisp, they're refreshing, and versatile, but if you've ever grown them before, you know that they can be a little bit of a hassle to manage. That's why today I'm going to show you how to grow cucumbers vertically so you can save space, keep your plants nice and healthy, and produce a ton of nice, big, juicy cucumbers all season long. Katrina here with Homegrown Florida. First things first, let's talk about the different kinds of trellises that you can use to grow your cucumbers vertically. There are a ton of options out there, from simple stakes with twine to elaborate structures made from PVC pipes and wire mesh. You'll want to choose a trellis that's sturdy enough to support your plants as they grow and that's easy to install and take down at the end of the season. Unless, of course, you want to put up a permanent structure that you don't have to take up and down. My two favorite types of trellises are number one, the Florida weave, and this arch trellis behind me. The Florida weave is a great option for temporary structures. Currently, I have my tomatoes trellis this way, but I know lots of people use this method for things like cucumbers and peas. All you need is two posts on either side of the bed and then some twine, and you just bring that twine back and forth, creating kind of a zigzag pattern to allow these little like tentacle like things for the cucumber to climb up. You'll want to make sure that that twine is nice and tight from each one of the poles, and then you just pull that twine up higher and higher so that it can continue to grow vertically. If you're looking for something more permanent, try an arch trellis. Mine is made up of 4 T-posts. I got those from Rural King, but I have seen them at Lowe's. Strangely, the Home Depot by my house does not carry T-posts. Then you can use something like a cattle panel to curve over the 4 posts. At the time that I put my trellis in, I didn't have a way of transporting a cattle panel from the store to my house, so I just picked up a spool of animal fencing. The downside of animal fencing versus a cattle panel is that it is very bendy. I figured that out my first season I used it. The center dipped down so badly, and the way that I ended up rectifying that was I added PEX tubing. This is a plumbing tube that doesn't bend very easily, so it's really worked amazing to hold up even heavy plants like my winter squash. Then I just used zip ties to link everything together. It took just an afternoon to put it together, and it has become my favorite addition to the garden. The biggest thing to consider when putting in a permanent trellis is to consider the sun as it moves through the sky in your particular garden. If I had the chance to do this one over, I probably would have run the arch east to west versus north to south. Because once the plants climb to the top of the trellis, the middle of the bed gets zero sun. So I can't really grow anything in that space. But if I would have ran it the other way, east to west, the center would have gotten light on either side, and I could have used that space more efficiently. The thing I did correctly, though, is picking which bed to put the trellis in. This is a full sun bed, which most trellising plants like. Also, when the trellis is completely full, it doesn't cast a shadow on any of my other beds, which is perfect. Growing vertically has been such an amazing option for me. Vining plants normally are more productive, and growing them vertically allows you to keep more plants in a smaller space. And I know we are all trying to figure out ways to grow more in the space we have, and vertically is really the way to go. So consider all these things when you decide to put a trellis in your garden. You won't regret it, trust me. Now let's get back to cucumbers. Cucumbers come in 2 main types, bush and vining. Bush cucumbers are more compact and can be grown in containers or small spaces, while vining cucumbers need more room to spread out. Bush varieties still get a little bit tall, so I like to use like a tomato cage with these plants. Vining cucumbers need something else. They need something to grow on, so a trellis or a fence, especially if you have like a chain link fence. Those are all ideal. You could allow them to run along on the ground, but any cucumber touching the soil will likely be affected by bugs more aggressively than if they are hanging on a trellis. Bush varieties are great options for smaller gardens, but I have found that they are not as productive as vining. If you are just growing them for fresh eating, that probably won't be a big concern. But if you want to grow them for things like canning, like pickles or relish, vining really is the way to go. When you're choosing your cucumber varieties, make sure to look for the growing habits and choose the one that's best suited for your garden. There are so many different varieties of cucumber out there, from pickling to slicing to the burpless kind. Pickling cucumbers are great for making pickles because they're small and crispy, which is exactly what you want in a pickle. I also like them in salads because they're just so cute and crispy. They are my favorite to grow in my garden for sure. My favorite variety right now is Boston pickling cucumber, although I like to try different things, as you guys know, so I reserve the right to change that later. Slicing cucumbers are perfect for salads, sandwiches, because they tend to be larger than pickling cucumbers and are more traditional for these types of foods. Now, burpless cucumbers are a newer variety that are much bigger, less bitter, and almost no seeds, and a lot of people find them to be easier to digest. I especially love these type of cucumbers for recipes where you want the crunch but not all the seeds. So think of things like low-carb sushi rolls made with the cucumber instead of rice seaweed paper, cucumber salad, or in my personal favorite, my favorite relish. I don't want to be scooping out seeds to make relish. I'm very much into dill relish, but I know a lot of people really like sweet relish, and these are great for that since they stay crunchy and have no seeds. My favorite burpless variety right now is Sweet Success cucumber. I grew these plants last spring and they were crazy productive and really, really big. It was actually a little bit overwhelming. Each cucumber was about a pound. These were the largest cucumbers I've ever grown, and honestly, probably the largest I've ever seen in person. We could not eat all of them ourselves. I was giving them away to anyone who would take them. They produced so many, I took a break from them. That was just a bit too much for me. Make sure that you choose a variety that works for you and your gardening goals. Now, cucumbers are either, I'm not going to pronounce any of these right, monoecious, genioecious, and parnithocarpic. I'll put them down here. Which, this is all about the flowering habit and pollination. So the mono one means that there are both male and female flowers on the same plant. That's what these guys are. Insects like bees are needed to move the pollen from the male flower to the female flower to pollinate them, or in my case, I like to hand pollinate, so with a paintbrush. Traditionally, the male flowers come in first, and there are a lot more of them than there are of the female flowers. Now, the gynoecious cucumbers have almost all female flowers and will need another plant, such as a mono variety, nearby to pollinate the female flowers. Many times when you buy these kinds of seeds, they will come with a mix of both mono and gynoecious. This means you have to grow multiple plants, but you tend to get a larger harvest since there are more female flowers on the plant, which means that it sets more fruit. There are some of those gynoeciosis, I'm totally not sure how to pronounce this stuff, but there are some of that G variety that behave like the Partheno variety, which is that they produce nothing but female flowers and they don't require pollination, which is very cool. This means no hand pollinating, no need for multiple plants, and if you're low on bees, perfect. They are very good for greenhouses or hydroponic systems, since these types of growing methods are not conducive to pollinators. But I like them because they are just plain easier. But with all these pros, there does come one con, which is that you cannot save the seeds. That's mostly because they don't have seeds, or the seeds that they do have are sterile. You have to take your good with your bad sometimes. If you're enjoying these tips, give me a thumbs up or hit that like button. I prefer to start my cucumbers in February and September here in Zone 9A, Central Florida. Make sure to choose a really nice sunny spot in your garden and prepare the soil with plenty of organic matter. You can either plant the seeds directly in the ground or use transplants, but if you decide to go with transplants, make sure to get them out there and moved into their forever home while they're still really small, since cucumbers don't really love being transplanted, and the younger they are, the easier they handle this. Either way you decide, make sure to space your plants out properly and give them plenty of room to grow, because they do get pretty big. I like to give them 1 square foot for bush varieties and about 6 inches for vining varieties that I'm growing vertically. Cucumbers are pretty heavy feeders, so make sure to fertilize them regularly. I like using something like the Epsom Garden Tone. I always amend the beds with Garden Tone before I direct seed them. If you're transplanting your seedlings, just grab a handful of fertilizer, place it in the planting hole before you move your transplants in. Then about halfway through the season, or if you're starting to see yellowing on the leaves or stunted growth, you can add some more to the soil around the plant. I usually add a watering with fish fertilizer too, since that will feed them right away while you wait for the granular fertilizer to break down. Special bonus tip, guys, if your cucumbers start to slow down with their flowering and the flowers are not producing fruit even when you're hand pollinating, they could need an extra hit of phosphorus and potassium. Fish fertilizer to the rescue. If you don't have any access to that, or you can't stand the smell, look for a liquid fertilizer that promotes blooms and flowering. That will give them exactly what they need. I usually do that about every week or two until the end of the season when I encounter that challenge. Then I know I need to add some amendments to that bed like kelp meal and bone meal before the next growing season. Even if you have really good soil and you start your plants at the right time and you fertilize them properly, it's very common to be battling pests in your garden, especially here in Florida. Organic pest control is important for keeping your cucumber plants healthy. The most common pests are aphids, whiteflies, pickleworms, and the cucumber beetle. The first two can be managed a couple different ways, such as like using water to spray them off. This works best if you have like a mild infestation. If it's much more extreme, you may want to consider an insecticidal soap and water mixture. I know lots of people turn to neem oil, which I used to do for a while, but it always seemed to do more harm than good. It always seemed to like burn my plants regardless of the small amount that I would use. And that ended up making the plants even sicker, and they die pretty quickly after that. Your best bet is to make sure you're growing your plants during the proper season when the bugs are low, and try spraying them off on water when you see them. Once they get really overwhelming, it's hard to control. Prevention is everything. That holds true for the pickleworms and the cucumber beetle too. The best way to avoid those after they've arrived is to get an organic product like BT or spinoside. You can use it as a preventative and spray the plants once the fruit begins to form, but what I like to do is wait until I see them doing some damage to the plants before I start spraying, since these sprays could hurt pollinators and we really need our pollinators. If you do plan on using it, try spraying it in the late afternoon and try to avoid spraying the actual flowers. I like to focus on spraying just the fruit and maybe some of the leaves right around it. Pickleworms run rampant in my garden. I have plenty of their predators in the garden, such as beetles and predatory wasps, but they don't always keep up. These guys are sleeping on the job. Even my lizards have gotten lazy. They're so fat. I think I'm doing kind of too good of a job of feeding them. Besides pests, the other thing you might want to keep a lookout for is powdery mildew. Mildew is a common cucumber disease, especially in an environment like Florida where it is warm and humid. This is basically the perfect breeding ground for that disease. There are ways to prevent though. I used to use a copper fungicide, but that didn't really work that well. I've also tried the milk and water mixture, and that never seemed to work for me, but I have heard others who swear by it. My go-to way of preventing this disease is a mix of hydrogen peroxide and water, 10 tablespoons to 1 gallon of water. Now I want to preface this that these different sprays to manage the disease is better at preventing than curing. Once a plant has it, you are on a tight timeline. I've never really had a plant recover from it. So if you start to notice the leaves with the white spots on it, start clipping those off and increase your spraying from once a week to every few days. Then increase your fertilizer to push the production to complete and get your harvest. The plant is going to go downhill, and your best plan of action is to get it harvested and out of the garden before it spreads to your other plants. Now let's grab a couple of these guys and we're going to go inside and we're going to make a meal with it. And believe it or not, it's not going to be pickles and it's not going to be a salad. It's going to be part of a dinner. So for dinner tonight, I am going to be making a Buddha bowl. Buddha bowls are one of my favorite things to make because you can literally use anything you have in the kitchen. The idea behind a Buddha bowl is to have a protein, some sort of carb, some vegetables, and a sauce. You can also add things like cheese and really cool high flavor items like sun-dried tomatoes, feta cheese. I start by cooking some chicken in a 400-degree oven for 25 minutes. For the vegetable portion, I'm going to shred up with a peeler some of our cucumbers, and then I'm also going to shred up some carrots. And I'm just using that peeler to kind of slice until you get to basically the seeded part of the cucumber. Then we're going to put the slices of those into a container that has a white wine vinegar. You can add some water here. You can add some oil if you like, some salt and pepper. I'm keeping it simple and I'm just doing the vinegar. Another vegetable we're adding from the garden is tomatoes, and I'm just slicing these up. Nothing fancy here. We're just going to top them with the tomatoes. For the sauce, I'm making a lime, what I call slurry or drizzle. We're going to take some sour cream and some lime juice, and we're going to mix that together really well and add just a dash of salt and a good amount of black pepper. If it's not thin enough, once you've mixed it together, you can add just like a teaspoon of water at a time until you get to that liquidy stage. Once the chicken is out of the oven, we're going to put it on a plate to the side, and then we're going to roast some broccoli, which is one of my favorite ways to eat broccoli. I'm just cutting some of it up using my kitchen shears. I'm going to spray it with a little bit of olive oil, and then I'm going to use the Greek seasoning that I used earlier on the chicken. And then we're just going to set that in the same 400-degree oven for 15 minutes. My husband is currently on a vegetarian diet at the moment, so while I'm having the chicken, he's going to be having whippoorwill cowpeas, and these were cowpeas that I had canned the other day, and so we have used about half of them on a vegetarian chili, and now I'm going to use some as his protein source for his broodable. And I'm just going to microwave this. I also have some brown rice. I make brown rice once a week because it takes about 45 minutes, and I make about 2 cups of it, and I leave it in a plastic container in the fridge so that we can have rice whenever we want. So I separated the rice and the beans into one bowl and the rice and the chicken into the other, and then I'm going to take our roasted broccoli and I'm going to put that evenly into both of the bowls. We'll add our tomatoes. I really like my Buddha bowls to be kind of mixed in all together. It's kind of my thing, but if you have some picky eaters out there that like their food not to touch, you can separate them into little piles. We're going to top that with our pickled carrots and cucumber off to the side. So what's cool about this Buddha bowl is you're getting that warm chicken, warm beans, warm rice, crunchy broccoli, pickled vegetables, fresh cold tomatoes, and then top that with that lime slurry. It's just an explosion of flavors and all these different like textures, which is what I'm very much into when it comes to eating. And here's our finished product.